Hello friends, my name is Kishan and welcome you in this video tutorial. In this video tutorial, we are going to look how ArrayList works internally in Java. As most of us would already be knowing that ArrayList is a resizable array implementation of the list interface. ArrayList grows dynamically as the elements are added to it. So let's see how ArrayList is internally implemented. What is the backing data structure for an array list, how it grows dynamically and ensures that there is always room to add elements. In this video tutorial, I'm going to take help of the Java source code to explain how array list works internally. And here I'm going to use Java 8 to explain you how array list works internally. So here you can see JRE system library, that is 1.8. So I have one question. Where does array list store elements? First of all, so if you go to the array list source code, then here on the top of the class you can see this array list class has declared object of array is called element data, which is kind of transient, right? So basically basic data structure used by array list to store objects is an array of object class, which is defined as follows. You can see over here, right? So I'm sure many of you would be thinking, why transient, and what about serializing an array list? Then ArrayList provides its own version of read object and write object methods, so no problem in serializing an array list, and that is the reason I think of making this object array as transient. So here you can see you will get the read object and write object, and these are the two method. Basically here you can see retain, and that helps us to array list to deserialize and serialize. So there is a one write object which helps us to serialize array list, and there is a one more method is called read object, and that helps array list to deserialize. So here if you look into the array list class, this array list class extends abstract list class and implements list interface, random access, clonable and serializable, right? So by default array list is serializable. Clonable means this by default array list is clonable as well, right? So and random access means array list element you can directly access randomly, means you can access by the index, and this also implements list interface. So all three methods are basically marker interface. There is no method in these three interfaces, but there are a lot of methods in this list interface. So array list overrides all the method which is available in the list in this class, right? So already we have talked about this declaration, right? Object array declaration. If you look into the this declaration, basically which basically declares object of array, so that means backing data structure of array list is the array itself, right? Now what happens when array list is created? So array list class provides three constructors to create an array list. So if I press Ctrl O, then you can see there is three constructor, right? One is the default constructor, doesn't take any parameter. Second is the array list constructor which takes a single parameter, that is nothing but the initial capacity. Another array list constructor which doesn't take any parameter, that basically takes the default capacity or default size of the array, and there is one more constructor which takes a collection of elements, right? So here if you look into this program, I have created a three array list object by using all these three constructor. So here you can see first constructor we have a basically default constructor. In case of default constructor is used, array list is created. If you go to the source code, then ArrayList is created something like this, right? So here you can see where default capacity empty element data is defined as, you can see, as a empty array. So if you call a default constructor to create an array list, then this element data object, that is the object of array, is going to initialize with the empty array, right? Now so you can see initially, basically if you look into the explanation about this constant, saying that shared empty array instance used for the default sized empty instances, we distinguish this from the empty element data to know how much to inflate when first element is added. This is saying that so you can see initially it will be initialized with an empty array. It will grow only when first element is added to the list, and that's what this is trying to say over here, right? This is all about the default constructor. Now we have another constructor which takes the initial capacity, right? So when this constructor is used, we can provide some initial capacity rather than depending on the default capacity, right? So as defined in the array list, you can see how it is defined in the array list. If you specify the initial capacity, then that object of array is getting created with this provided initial capacity. If you specify capacity is 0, then this is going to initialize with the empty object array, and if you specify some kind of negative value, then this is going to throw in illegal capacity, that is initial capacity what you are providing. So this exception will be thrown at runtime, right? So now basically here basically it is easy to see here, what if provided capacity is greater than 0, then the element data array will be created with the capacity. In case provided capacity is 0, then element data array is initialized with an empty object array. In that case, array list will grow when first element is added, and that's what this constructor is saying. Now if I come to the client program, I have another third constructor, right, which takes something like this. So here if you look into the constructor, this constructor accepts basically a collection as an argument, right? So if we want to construct a list containing the elements of a specified collection, we can use this constructor. In this constructor, implementation checks for the length of the collection passed as the parameter. If length is greater than 0, then arrays.copy of, here you can see arrays.copy of method is used to copy the collection to the element data array, and that's what this is happening, right? If you look into the collection arrays.copy, then copy of, then first argument is the original array, and second is argument is the new length, and finally is the object array.class, right? So here this is pretty straightforward, right? Now next thing we would like to discuss how array list grows dynamically, right? So when we add an element to an array list, it first verifies whether it has the much capacity in the array to store new elements or not. In case there is not, then new capacity is calculated, which is 50% more than the old capacity, and the array is increased by that much capacity, right? So now we can see the add method of array list. So let's go to the add method, so here you can pass the element to add, right? So here first of all ensure capacity internal is getting called. So size is gonna increment by 1 when you try to add more elements, and if you go to here, then ensure capacity internal, there we are passing the minimum capacity, and here you can see here check is applied if element data equal to default capacity empty data, right, and that is nothing but the empty array. Then control will go to the inside, and minimum capacity is going to calculate by the max method of math. So So either whichever is the minimum will be taken as the mean capacity. So default capacity would be the 10 in case of array list, and if you if whichever is the minimum of these two, that will be assigned to the minimum capacity. And after that, ensure explicit capacity method is gonna call, that is basically incrementing the mode count, because one element you are going to add. And finally, one check is applied saying that if minimum capacity is greater than element data array length, then grow method is getting called. So here basically when array is realizing there is needs to grow the size of array or not. If you go to the grow method, then here all logic you can see how new capacity is gonna assign. So new capacity equal to old capacity plus old capacity of right shift operator is getting applied. So this will basically increase the old capacity by the 50%, right? If your old capacity is 10, then new capacity would be the 15, something like. If your old capacity is 20, then new capacity would be the 50% of old capacity, that means 30. So that's where array list capacity is gonna increase, and all those stuff you can see the rest of the codes are how they have written. So basically grow method decides whether size of array is gonna grow or not, right? Now next thing, what happens when element is removed? Now if I go to the here, and if you look into the remove method, right? So here is the remove method, which basically takes the index as an argument, right? So when elements are removed from an array list using either remove index or remove, there is one more method which accepts the object as well. Whichever object you want to remove, that you can pass it over here, right? So any of the method if you call, then gap created by the removal of an element has to be filled in the underlying array, and that is done by the shifting any subsequent element to the left, right? And that is basically done by the one of the method is called. So if I go to the here in remove method, then here you can see the system dot array copy method is getting called, and this basically takes 4 parameter, right? This takes the basically 5 parameters, right? So here index plus 1 is the source position, index is the destination position. Since element at the position index is removed, right? So elements starting from the index plus 1 are copied to the destination starting from the index. So that's what source code says. Now there are some of the key points which you will have to keep in mind when we talk about the internal implementation of array list. This is the one of the changes. So till Java 6, the new capacity calculation used like this. So old capacity into 3 whole divided by 3 plus 1. This was the scenario till Java 6, but that was changed in the Java 7. So now Java 7 onwards, as I have shown you, now new capacity will be calculated something like this: old capacity plus old capacity right shift operator, right? So this will also increase size by the 50%, right? Now here there are some of the key points we will have to keep in mind when we talk about the internal working of the array list. First of all, array list is a resizable array implementation of list interface. Second, internally array list class uses array of object class to store its element. Now when initializing an array list, you can provide initial capacity, then the array would be of the size provided by as initial capacity. Now next point, if initial capacity is not specified, then default capacity used to create an array, which is the default capacity is 10. When elements is added to the array list, it first verifies whether it can accommodate the new elements it needs to grow. In case capacity has to be increased, then the new capacity is calculated, which is 50% more than the old capacity, and array is increased by that much capacity. And final point, when elements are removed from the array list, a space created by the removal of an element has to be filled in the underlying array. That is done by the shifting any subsequent elements to the left. So that's all point I have.